Chapter 6, Building on a Foundation. A day or two later, Cake and I were both out in our front yards at the same time. I wandered across the street to look at an old rain-soaked baseball glove she pulled out from under one of the bushes lining her front porch, and we wound up talking. So, Dilly, I don't want to pry, but what did you think about the other night? What do you mean? Well, I just wonder if you had any questions. Remember, you are the one who started all this by asking me why I was willing to help Harry Page. Did anything make sense? Did you understand that loving someone doesn't have to mean anything romantic? It just means caring about other people and helping them when you can, especially if they really need it. Oh, sure, I'd heard some of that before. That wasn't the first time I ever came across the word Bible or fruits of the Spirit. I do know, Deli, but that's not the point. I don't think I've heard it all pulled together quite as well before, even by a real preacher in a real church. Yeah, well, sometimes big things are easier to understand when they are talked about in smaller words. I then turned to head back home when suddenly something made me spin around and stand there for about 15 seconds before I spoke again. Cake. There is one thing I'm not sure I understand, I finally blurted out. This whole fruits of the spirit thing makes sense only if you know what everyone means by having the spirit inside of you in the first place. I mean, you can't get something from nothing. She knew instantly what I was trying to say. That's a good point, Deli, and it deserves a good answer. Do you want to go to talk to Mr. Morgan? I think he's probably home for lunch right now. No, if you can't explain it, I don't think I want to know, I said, turning back toward my own house. Wait, I didn't say I couldn't explain. Give me a chance. Cake looked more than a little panicked when I turned back to face her, but she calmed down right away and stood there very quiet for about as long as I had, probably thinking like I'd been doing. Finally, she began to talk again, but in a much slower voice than usual. Deli, it's the most simple concept in the whole Bible, even more basic than the things we talked about the other night. It's like the bricks and the concrete that go in the ground to hold up your house. You can't build on top of plain old dirt. You've got to start with something a lot more solid. She hesitated for a moment, then continued. Think of it another way. Do you know what the word comprehensive means? Comprehensive? That's what we are talking about here. It's a complete change in who you are. It starts out small and winds up big. Nothing is left out. Does that make any sense? As it happened, I already knew that word and I told her so. All right then. The comprehensive change I'm talking about starts with just one thing. We are not perfect. None of us is. Perfect no matter how hard we might try. By ourselves, we cannot be anything more than ordinary people, full of bad thoughts and bad words waiting to come out, which we can sometimes push down out of sight. But they don't stay there. They always get loose at some point, and they make us far, far less than what we could be if we had the right kind of help. That help, as I'm sure you've heard other people say before, can only come from God. The Bible talks about it over and over, but lots of people still don't get it. If I can use another big word that you're probably familiar with, you have to acknowledge that there's a big difference between you and me and the God who created us. That difference is called sin. But here's what you have to remember. The word sin by itself doesn't have to mean terrible things like killing and robbing. Going back to what I just said, on the most simple level, sin is nothing more than the difference between God and us. Because, and here Cake paused for an even longer time, looking into my eyes like she was not going on until she saw whatever she was searching for. Finally, I guess she found it. Because God Himself is perfect and we are not. God Himself is love and we are not. God Himself is joy, peace, kindness, goodness, and all those other things, and we are not. And that's why we need His Spirit to live inside us, not so He can make us perfect, because that will never happen, but so He can help us get closer and closer to Him the more we listen and respond. And eventually, so He can bring us into heaven to be with Him forever after we die. Wow, I'd never heard it laid out quite that way before, even though I'd already been to church a fair number of times at that point in my life. I didn't know what to say, and so I said nothing for at least a whole minute. Finally, Cake added one more thought. The thing is, she said, any of us can have God's Spirit inside anytime we want. All we have to do is ask Him for it without trying to pretend anything at all. The fact is, you can't pretend. It has to be real on your part before He can make it real on His part. There just isn't any other way, and yet it's the simplest thing in the world to do once you agree in your heart to reach out to Him. Just ask Him. Just tell Him you're ready and ask Him to come in. By that time, Cake was almost whispering. In a way, somewhere in the back of my mind, I realized that talking quietly made me want what she was talking about 100 times more than if she'd been yelling at me, but I still wasn't ready. I don't know, Cake, I finally said. You make it sound good, but I'm not sure. I need a chance to think. Can we talk about this again in a few days? Of course, whenever you're ready. I can help you. Mr. Morgan can help you. But in the end, you really don't need either one of us. It's between you and God, and only God can speak for himself. That ended our conversation, but the subject did not go away.